Inflation is a tax. It is a hidden regressive tax that's stolen from you without your permission, without your knowledge. So all of these taxes we're paying is paid with devalued money that has been taxed, and it's insidious. Ultimately, you're only going to need 0.25 to 0.28 of a Bitcoin in order to have abundance in the future. But people get caught up in these XRPs and all these other silly yo-yo coins, and again, it's because of the unit bias of, oh, well, this is cheap. It's only $2 a coin, or it's only 50 cents a coin. 100 Satoshis, 8 cents or whatever it is. Well, I like to say 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. But if we're talking about in fiat terms, I could see it going to 200 before the end of the year.
Today, I'm excited to welcome Tony back to the podcast. Tony is a Bitcoin advocate, node runner, critical thinker, sober, a survivor, and a conspiracy realist. And it's on the 54th anniversary of the Nixon Shock of 1971. Good to see you again, Tony.
Hey, good morning, Paula. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me again.
It's great to see you. For those people who didn't see our first interview, tell us a little bit about yourself and your challenges in the beginning of your journey and what brought you to Bitcoin.
Sure. Well, going back to the beginning, I come from very humble beginnings. It was generational poverty, abuse, neglect, alcoholism, addiction, a lot of the challenges of that lifestyle, and so there was no financial intelligence or economic intelligence. It was just all about survival. Over the years, growing up and in my adult life, I sort of lived in that sort of lifestyle of making poor choices and putting myself in negative environments and basically holding myself down, and so the Bitcoin journey for me really started, I would say the precursor was whenever I discovered Ron Paul and the Ron Paul movement in 2007 and again in 2011. The libertarian mentality or mindset and teachings. And at that time, I was based on the teachings, from Ron Paul and the libertarian movement. I thought that gold was the answer. That's whenever I first started learning about the Federal Reserve, the fiat monetary system, some of the history of our monetary system. And, the interesting thing about that is that a lot of those things didn't stick fundamentally because of where I was in life at the time. I still had a lot of instability in my own life. And so I first heard about Bitcoin in 2013 when a friend of mine was mining it, and it was, I believe, $1,000 per coin. And I reached out to him and asked him about it. And again, I just wasn't ready for it, and so I didn't pay attention to it again until 2017 when there was exponential growth where I believe it went up to like $17,000 or $18,000. And a friend of mine he was buying it. It was someone I worked with. And again, I ignored it. I wasn't ready for it. And so it wasn't until the COVID crash of 2020 and when they shut down global production, they started printing trillions of dollars, and there was this campaign of fear and uncertainty, just all this craziness in society. And so I knew I needed to do something. I had remembered what Ron Paul had taught me about printing money and the Federal Reserve and the fiat system. And during this time period, they were printing 40% of all the money that's ever been created. And so I knew that there was going to be a backlash or blowback from that. The repercussions of that was going to be monetary inflation and the rising prices of everything. And so not knowing where to go or what to do with my money, for some reason, instinctively, Bitcoin just made sense. And so I bought Bitcoin, I bought crypto because I didn't differentiate those things at the time. I bought gold and silver, and I bought some other assets. And that I bought it without even knowing anything about it, and so once I put skin in the game, I really began studying it and spending a lot of time researching it. And here we are 5 years later, and I've learned so much about it, and I'm still learning about it. I mean, it's ever evolving, ever changing. There's just so many aspects to it that Saylor said that you could spend 10,000 hours studying it and still won't even have a full understanding of it. And so I believe that. I've spent thousands of hours on it over the past 5 years, and I believe it's a freedom and an escape that's available to 8 billion people. And so that's kind of where I'm at on my journey at this point.
I love that. And we're going to get deeper into the lessons you've learned since we spoke.
Sure.
But you spoke about,
Mm.
money printing, and I seen that M2 money supply continues to rise. And even in the US, we tried to cut back, but we weren't able to. So lots of money is going to be created or printed. What do you think about this? And where do you think we are in the macro cycle?
Well, like Lynn Alden says, I think that nothing stops this train. I mean, it doesn't matter who is in office. It doesn't matter whether it's red or blue. They're going to continue to print the money. They're going to continue to create money to basically try to keep the system afloat. You have trillions of dollars in unfunded liabilities. That's not even counted as part of the current debt. The debt is $37 million. It has doubled in the last 10 years. I was looking at some charts this morning. The first time that we hit $1 trillion in debt was in 1982, and it took 4 years to double that. So by 1986, it had doubled to 2 trillion. Well, 10 years ago, it was 17, 18 trillion dollars, and now it's 37 trillion dollars, and that is unsustainable. And that's why in the last 10 years, prices have increased on everything, and I like to use the example of real estate or housing. You know, um, it's not that those prices are going up, it's because they're printing and devaluing the currency, which gives the impression to society that prices are rising. And really it's just because those dollars are buying less, and so what Bitcoin represents, and it's unlike anything we've ever experienced in human history. So that's why it's so confusing and scary to people, and why it's hard for people to understand, because we've never had anything like this in human history. And so, to me, what Bitcoin represents is it's a barometer. It's a meter of what's wrong with the fiat monetary system. And that continues to reveal itself over and over and over again. And so again, I mean, I consider Bitcoin an escape, from that system that we were born into, didn't have a choice, and this provides that sort of escape avenue.
Yeah, it absolutely does. Why do you think more people don't see that Bitcoin is the solution? Because I think people do see that prices are going up. Like you said, you were framing it. Actually, prices are not going up. The dollar is being printed and there are more units in the system. And I'm trying to reframe my thinking on that. But why do you think more people don't see the problem?
I think that everybody is bombarded with all sorts of different information, misinformation, disinformation, traditional lines of thinking. I mean, most of our lives, real estate was considered a great investment vehicle, and that's it. And the way that I interpret it is that it seemed great, but really it was just kind of treading just ahead of inflation. Those gains or those increases in value. But it was just the best vehicle that we had as like normal society, like the normies. It was like buy the home, invest in the home, and that's your greatest asset. So I like to use the primary home as the example, really, because we never really had any other normal middle class hardworking people didn't really have any sort of, they weren't going to play the stock market or become brokers or traders. And so it was that primary residence was the primary investment vehicle. And I would say that since they printed 40% of the money supply in 2020, 21, that's whenever those prices really started accelerating with the homes. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that something's wrong, that this doesn't equate. But again, there's still so much misinformation and disinformation out there. And because Bitcoin represents something that we've never experienced, it's really hard for people to wrap their heads around it. And sometimes, I mean, even me, I mean, sometimes like there's still these aha moments for me, these light bulb moments, and sometimes I get light bulb moments more than once over the same topic. And so, what I would say is, I mean, people have to really put some research into it. I mean, people have to take the time and study it and research it with an open mind in order to even try to grasp what this is.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's true. Sometimes we have to learn things many times before it really sinks in. And we all know that price brings a lot of people in. And right now we're near all-time highs. How much do you focus on price, and do you see that as a good thing?
Well, long term, I mean, I know that the price is only going to go up over time. It's going to go up. It's going to continue to go up and to the right over time. We did just hit the new all-time high a few days ago, and then it immediately dipped. And there was, and Bitcoin short term isn't immune to the market. So there's going to be fear that causes sell-offs. There's excitement that causes people to buy and FOMO in. And so really it's just again, it's just a barometer of the system. It's exponentially going to continue to outpace inflation, and that's the way to build and preserve wealth and financial freedom. I thought about this quote the other day when I first started trying to understand the Bitcoin rabbit hole, was when I heard somebody at the time say the best way to build or preserve wealth is to outpace real inflation. And that really stuck with me. I'd never heard that before. I never thought about it in that context. But really it made so much sense to me, because you have to try to beat the system at the game that they have rigged against us. That's how you survive. That's how you stay afloat. And so Bitcoin represents that opportunity. It represents that hope. I never had an exit plan before, but I always had this fantasy of some sort of escape. If things got bad, like, if things get bad, I'm going to go live abroad or whatever. And those were just like these fantasy types of thinking. And Bitcoin represents a reality to that fantasy. Like, there is an escape, there's hope against this system that's rigged against us.
Yeah, I agree. It is very, very hopeful. Do you think that in the short term, the 4 year Bitcoin cycle will continue?
That's really up for debate. I see a lot of intelligent people debating that. I don't think anybody knows what it's going to do. We can all speculate, and everybody does. I don't know if the 4 year cycle is over or not. I know that there's big institutional money that's just pouring into this thing. I believe that the governments are going to continue they're going to FOMO. I believe that the things that have been theoretical over the past, since I've been in this space, are happening now. We had yesterday where the Secretary of Treasury said they weren't going to buy any more Bitcoin, and then the market immediately dipped, and then 2 or 3 hours later he came back and corrected himself. So that what that tells me is that the Bitcoin community has influence on officials, and on the government. And I'm not here to advocate Trump, because I'm not necessarily a Trump fan, but this administration is pro Bitcoin. There's some really key individual people in the administration that are pro Bitcoin, not because they want to be, because they have to be. I mean, there's that saying, Bitcoin doesn't need you, you need Bitcoin. That applies to governments too.
Yeah, love that saying. So while we're on price, do you have a guess of where it ends up this year?
Um, well, I like to say one Bitcoin equals one Bitcoin. But if we're talking about in fiat terms, I could see it going to 200 before the end of the year. I believe that there's going to be some rate cuts next month. In September, there's a good chance that the Fed's going to cut rates. Again, that's them manipulating the market, which that's normal to us, but that's part of the fallacy of the Federal Reserve is they have the power to manipulate markets with their interest rates and money printing. But I do believe that we're going to have some rate cuts before the end of the year, and that's going to inject a lot of liquidity into the market. And I believe that Bitcoin is going to benefit from that greatly.
I think that's a really good point. And, the reason I still ask that question is because we can buy more Bitcoin now with our fiat dollars, than at 200,000, right? So that's why
Yes.
we like to know if, but it's probably the best suggestion is just to DCA when you have the extra fiat.
Yes. Yeah. And um, I just heard this the other day too. Every all-time high is a future dip, meaning there's going to always be all-time highs. So today's all-time high is actually a dip in the future. So, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 a neat context to have, you know.
Yeah. One other thing about the government, yeah, they did say they're not going to buy any Bitcoin for now, but they're not revaluing the gold shares. So we don't know what they're doing. The best thing we can do is buy Bitcoin and learn Bitcoin.
Absolutely. It's funny you say that because there's this theoretical gold reserves that hasn't been audited in forever. We don't even know how much gold the government has. Fort Knox hasn't been audited in decades, and that was one of the things when this administration came into office, they were going to audit Fort Knox, and then that kind of died, right? That's been memory hold. I didn't know. It's funny. I did not know until like a week or two ago that their gold holdings were priced at $44 an ounce. So they hadn't repriced the gold since 1973, I believe. That blew my mind. So like they're manipulating and suppressing their own gold holdings, and I still don't even know why. Like that just blows my mind that they're using pricing from 1973. So if they even have the gold, so
I
oops.
know. That's a big question. And on that historical note, as you mentioned at the beginning, today is the 54th anniversary of the 1971 Nixon shock. And I know you have studied this quite extensively. Tell us a little bit about that and also how it started in 1913.
Sure, yeah, the Federal Reserve Act of 1913, that was a culmination of these very powerful bankers and elites getting together in 1910 at Jekyll Island in Georgia. There's a good book called The Creature from Jekyll Island that kind of addresses a lot of these things. Um, and they devised this plot to create this Federal Reserve, and there was actually people against it. And the Federal Reserve, one thing to understand is it's not it's not federal, and there's no reserves. It's a central bank with that title, Federal Reserve, but they're a private institution, and so people hear a lot about the Federal Reserve now, especially with this administration, where they're critical of Jerome Powell and the high interest rates and whatnot. Um, but this is basically the bank that lends to the government and lends to other banks, and so that central bank the Federal Reserve Act was created in 1913 as the banker for the United States, and it's no coincidence that a year later the Income Tax Act was passed, which was going to extract your time and labor via taxes, and then World War One also was launched. There's a lot of indications that the central banks of Europe and the central bank of the United States, the Federal Reserve, they were in collaboration with each other. And so that's why there's this term that the banks fund all sides of the war, and that there's some truth to that. During that time period, we were still on a gold standard. The dollar was, and so the dollar was backed by gold. And then after World War II, there was the Bretton Woods Agreement that basically pegged the US dollar to gold and pegged all the other nations' currencies to the dollar. And so that added stability to the global markets, with the US being basically the reserve asset pegged to gold. Um, and I think the problem began after World War II. There was abundance. There was the GIs coming home. They were going to college. They were building, homes. The middle class lifestyle began. You had the husband that worked, mom stayed home with the kids, had a house, was able to have a car, a future, basically send the kids to college. And what happened is leading up to the 60s, then we start getting involved in the Vietnam conflict, start spending a lot of money in deficit, running up deficits with that. The Johnson was also running President Johnson was also running up a lot of deficits with the social programs, and so they started abusing that system, the currency system, And so other nations started questioning whether there was enough gold reserves. And so France and some other countries started wanting to get their gold reserves back. And this led up into the Nixon shock of 1971, when all these nations started questioning the United States printing or spending more than what they held in reserves. And these nations, started questioning that. And then that led to, on August 15th, 1971, Nixon had this program in the evening. It was broadcast on all the news stations, and it's where he, in that speech, he said he was going to temporarily suspend the convertibility of gold to dollars, and he blamed it on speculators and you know manipulation. And what's crazy is that the way he sold it, my understanding is that the population bought it, like that they bought into it. There wasn't any major protests or rise ups or anything. And so at that moment, the Nixon shock of 1971 is basically when we began the fiat monetary system, and that's where the dollar is not backed by anything. Basically, they can print it. And then there were some other agreemets that occurred with the petrodollar system, the agreements with Saudi Arabia and OPEC, where the global oil exchanges would be traded in U.S. dollars. And so that was another way to keep the system going as well. But other than that, that just was tied to the oil. But other than that, the dollar became our greatest export. We weren't really producing anything. We're um, exporting dollars and importing cheap goods. And so that's where over these since 1971 we've had the deterioration of goods and services because everything is getting devalued. And so even today, I know a real estate agent who's talking about how homes that are being built are poor quality all over the place, all over the DFW marketplace. But it's not just Dallas Fort Worth; it's everywhere. Things aren't built the way they used to be, and that's a lot of that is tied to the devaluation of the dollar. And so that kind of runs through the history of how this thing brought us to where we are now, and the way the debt is doubling exponentially. And so um, there's going to have to be some sort of reset, whatever that looks like, whether that's a central bank digital currency, um, universal basic income. So all of these theoretical concepts, but the way the system that we have it's not sustainable.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks for that. I think a lot of people don't really know the history. And the reason I didn't know it either, because I wasn't aware of what was really going on. And you bring up the point how fiat currencies are now permeating society in so many different ways. Because before the gold standard, markets weren't entirely free, but there was much less inflation. Since we went off the gold standard, inflation has just continued to get worse and worse because, as we know from the Bitcoin world, when people get in government, they may have good intentions, but they end up printing and printing because it really benefits them. Talk a little bit more about how fiat currency is permeating through society. You mentioned that the quality of houses are not as good. And because these builders are trying to make money, so they're cutting corners, just like the fiat food. Everyone's cutting corners to make money to get ahead in this crazy, debasing world that most people aren't aware is actually happening to that extent.
Yeah, yeah. It's good you bring up the food, because I'd read somewhere that in revolutions the shooting doesn't stop until people are hungry, or
Hmm.
the shooting doesn't start until people are starving. And one of the insidious ways that they started to hide the inflation, the repercussions of inflation, was by devaluing the food. So the food that had been healthy for generations, the meats, the eggs, they started becoming pricey or expensive in an inflationary environment. And so the the response to that was to create mass produce industrial foods, the processed foods, using subsidies, corns, grains, and so that kept the the price of food stable in the society, so people weren't really noticing that these prices were going up or that the dollar was being devalued. And so the that's where we have all of these health implications, the chronic health diseases, autoimmune diseases, obesity. Like a lot of that is tied to the fiat food. And so if food had stayed real, then there probably would have been a revolt or mass disruption early on because hey, we can't afford to eat. But because they were able to hide inflation through this mass-produced subsidized food, that's basically killing people, with the health diseases, they've been able to hide the true cost of inflation. And then one of the things that they did was they manipulated the cost through CPI, the Consumer Price Index, which is the basket of goods used to measure inflation. But they're always switching out the goods that are in that basket in order to adjust their numbers to where they want to be. The food is a good example of how the inflation has been manipulated. But again, it goes into everything. So along with not just the food, but the quality of goods and services. Like that saying, they don't make them like they used to. On the gold standard, back in the old days, a refrigerator would last you a lifetime. There was light bulbs that would last for years, and then these, and what's funny about that is the light bulb manufacturers got together and collaborated to put a shelf life on light bulbs. Like, oh, they're only gonna be good for 1,000 hours or 10,000 hours, and so they made the filaments weaker, and we encounter the same things today in goods and services.
Yeah, I absolutely see that in real estate too. People say, "Oh, well, I've had that appliance for 7 years." And I'm thinking, "Well, they used to last for 20 years." And
Yeah,
and we've been conditioned now to think, "Oh, yeah, that's time to replace it." But I love also that you talked about food because that's a big interest of mine. And the funny thing is, I think people don't realize it is because diseases take many, many years. And by the time you've got something, and I'm not saying it's not so cut and dry exactly how people get diseases, but the
sure.
chemicals in the food and the poor quality of food absolutely do not help. and and then of course we have the medical and the pharmaceutical system, and the drugs sometimes are harmful too. So it is a deep rabbit hole, that one as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, it really is.
And with the food, the other insidious way they hide it is what's called shrinkflation. So they make the portions smaller. And like I saw something the other day where a burger was $1 and it was this big, and now it's this big and it's $5.
Mhm.
And it's less healthy. It's not even real
Exactly.
food. So that's the way it's inflation, shrinkflation, and lower quality of ingredients. The paying attention to the food of where it is compared to where it was before that we were taking off the gold standard is pretty eye opening, you know. Um, but
Yeah.
again, it permeates everything. I mean, because normal hardworking Americans or people are just trying to stay ahead and pay the ever increasing bills, the insurance, the rent or the mortgage, the property taxes. Everything's going up. Everything is increased in price based on a devalued dollar. Those add to the stress factors. The psychological, the emotional, the mental, issues in society, where it creates that hopelessness. It can lead to depression. The disruption of the family unit, divorce, alcoholism, depression, addiction. So there's these social issues that are affected as a result of a devalued money. And I'd said it before. I mean, people talk about, tax this, tax that, everything's taxed, but what the key that's important to remember on that is inflation is a tax. It is a hidden regressive tax that's stolen from you without your permission, without your knowledge. Um, and so all of these taxes we're paying is paid with devalued money that has been taxed. And it's insidious. I consider it evil, really.
You're absolutely right. It is insidious. And you have said that people get Bitcoin when they are ready for Bitcoin. I love
Yeah.
that, and I use it often. Tell
Good.
us
Yeah.
more about this.
I still believe in that. Not everybody agrees with me, but I don't believe that everyone gets Bitcoin at the price they deserve. I believe that the people that are anti-Bitcoin and naysayers, and even it doesn't matter, there's going to be people that are critical of it even when it gets to $1 million. Those people deserve Bitcoin at the price they deserve, or they get it at the price they deserve. But not all of us, I mean, really for normal people, it's just when we're ready for it, and Michael Saylor said something to the effect of because Bitcoin is on a need to know basis. So that's when people become ready, is when they need to know. My need to know basis was in 2020 when I was not sure what was going on with society. Things were happening that were unprecedented. We had never had a sort of global shutdown with all this fear and uncertainty and different directions that we were being led to, and the money printing and shut down of production and all these mandates, mask mandates, 6 foot distances, all these things that caused, uncertainty. So that was my need to know point, and I know a lot of Bitcoiners that's when they got involved was during the COVID period, and so I knew immediately when they started printing trillions and dollars and they're issuing all this stimulus and people, getting $1,500, $1,600 checks, that there was going to be a price to pay, and that was going to be the inflation, and so again, you had to outrun that, and so uh, everyone gets Bitcoin when they're ready for Bitcoin. um, in the last since we last spoke, I've actually orange pilled a couple more people. I say a couple because not everybody gets it. Someone just told me the other day that I got him involved in 2022 in the bear market, and I thought he was all in, and he told me the other day he had sold it. And it's like, okay, well, maybe he wasn't ready for it, and but I have some friends that are all in, ready for it. I have a friend, he's has an IT background, and he's mining it and doing all kinds of things. He's like past me as far as the technical skills. I mean, he's orange pilled, and he gets it. And and it's really fun to watch those developments, and those evolutions where someone gets introduced to it and then they just go all in, because it's in my real world life, it's still rare, it's still rare.
Yeah, that's true. That's why we have to get together and talk with each other because
Sure.
it's still rare. Adoption is less than 5%, I believe, of the total
Hmm.
world. I also like your tagline because you say, if you don't believe it or don't get it, I don't have time to convince you, which we get Bitcoin when we're ready for it. But at the same time, you don't want to be wasting your time with people who aren't ready. Is that what you mean?
Well, who said that, right?
Who?
Satoshi.
Really? Okay,
That's a
yeah, that's right.
that's a
Yeah.
quote from Satoshi in one of the chat rooms. If you don't believe it or don't have time for it, or if you don't believe it or don't want it, I don't have time to teach you. Sorry, something to that effect. Like,
In other
um,
words, you got to get the problem before you.
yeah, and that's the best way to kind of introduce Bitcoin is, instead of saying what is Bitcoin, you really got to ask what is money. You know, you got to understand money, and we weren't taught that. I wasn't taught that. I mean, I know people that still, it blows my mind. I know people that think the dollar is backed by gold still. And then I have to go down that trail and say, no, it's not. And that we just don't pay attention to money. We pay attention to making it, earning it. What can we afford? That's what's in people's mind when it comes to money. Do I have enough of it? Am I going to be able to buy this? Am I going to be able to pay my rent? I want this thing, this shiny thing, so I need to make this much of it to get it. That's what normal people think about. But money is half of every transaction. So all those things that we're chasing and needing and wanting, that's only half of the equation. And we can understand those. The person that wants the Lamborghini understands everything about it. And or the person that wants the new purse, or the person that needs to pay their rent in order to stay where they're, keep living where they're at. We understand that aspect of it. But half of that equation is money. Half of that transaction is money, but we don't understand the money, and so learning about the money, the history of money is very critical to even beginning and the Bitcoin journey. And so I explain that to people.
Absolutely. And another thing that I never thought about is that we actually store our energy in money. I just thought it was a way to exchange goods, but I never went that deep. And that's where we need to store our energy, because if we want to have enough to retire one day, our money needs to hold its value.
Correct. Absolutely. I never thought about that either. Money is monetary energy. It's energy stored from our time and labor, from the work that we put in. That we're the work we put in, the output is money. And so that's one of the evil things about fiat and the currency is that it's not really money, because money is supposed to be a store of value. That's one of the definitions of money is it's a unit of account, a medium of exchange, and store of value. And the store of value part has been robbed from us through the fiat system. It is a it is a it's a battery that's draining. That energy is draining in fiat. And so Bitcoin is that ultimate battery, where you can store that monetary energy and actually watch it grow over time. And so yeah, the monetary energy aspect of it, that's really important to try to wrap your head around.
Yeah. And I see you have Jason Lowry's book there.
I do. Yeah. I bought it in 2020 or 2021 after it first came out. I think it was $30. The Department of Defense pulled it from production for a while, and the price of it shot up to like $4,000 for the paperback.
Wow.
But it's in distribution now. I mean, you can buy it now, but yeah, when I think they banned it or something, and the price of it shot up for a while. Yeah.
So is that one of your go-to books?
You know, Paula, I haven't read it.
You haven't?
I have not read it.
That's
No.
too funny.
I know.
Why?
Um, it's I think it's probably gonna be some heavy reading, and so I just haven't. I've read several books. I haven't read that one, the thesis. So,
Yeah.
um, so it needs. I think about it a lot. I need to read it. So,
Well, and you call yourself a conspiracy realist. What are some of the conspiracies that have been proven true or will be and affect Bitcoin adoption? Are there any?
well, that's hard to say. Putting Bitcoin into the conspiracy theory realm. I mean, there's some, like there's a lot of conspiracy theories surrounding Bitcoin, who the founder is, whether it's NSA, CIA, if I mean, there's a lot of conspiracy theories, which is part of what makes it fascinating, really. There's some theories about whether it's going to become a global, the global reserve currency, or who knows? I mean, the thing again, some of the things that were theoretical in the past are actually happening. Like we have an administration that's openly talking about the adoption and preservation of Bitcoin. And a Bitcoin treasury asset, and being very pro Bitcoin. And so those things we didn't have an administration before this that did that. The last administration really tried to stifle it and criminalize it a lot of ways. With Choke Point 2.0. But yeah, I don't know, Paula. It's hard for me to think about a conspiracy theory regarding Bitcoin that's come true, right off the top of my head.
Well, and then just any in general that
Mm.
you are really focused on right now.
Well, I'm not focused on it now because I spent a lot of time over the years. But the Epstein files are that's a big one. That's a big one. And I think that I believe that there's a lot of global implications there, global government implications and intelligence agencies. This wasn't the sex trafficking of young girls or minors was just one aspect of Jeffrey Epstein. He was the banker and the money mover for a lot of powerful entities. And there was military arms and I mean there's so much to that. I mean that the child sex trafficking was just one facet of Jeffrey Epstein, and so and you see the people that were tied to him. I mean, golly, the attorney general's dad was Jeffrey Epstein's boss, and Ghislaine Maxwell's dad was Israeli intelligence agent. I mean, so there's a lot of connecting the dots there. And, I think that the reason that they're suppressing it is that it could be very disruptive to the global order. you know?
And that's what I wanted to ask you. Why do you think they overlook the, the trafficking of girls and all of that? Is because it's connected to much bigger things and money?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Money, money and power. And, there's, um, Epstein he had hidden cameras everywhere on all his properties, and he wasn't capturing that video evidence for himself. That was a global espionage and blackmail operation at high levels. There was governments involved and intelligence agencies involved. And I don't believe that Epstein just worked for Israeli intelligence. I believe that he worked for a lot of the intelligence agencies. He was sort of a free agent, if you will. That's why he was involved with a lot of powerful people. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. They said they were going to release the Epstein files, and then they didn't. And like, I don't trust any of them, honestly. I wish there was a blockchain or a time chain where you could do data dumps, or there could be whistleblower data dumps, and it's forever embedded in that time chain and can't be changed or can't be manipulated. Just like in the Genesis block of Bitcoin, where Satoshi embedded the chancellor on the brink of a second bailout for banks. He embedded a news article in that first Genesis block, and that's embedded forever. Nobody can ever go back and change history on that. Say, oh, there was no bank bailouts. Everything was fine. It was the people buying the houses that caused the global housing crisis. Like we need that sort of system where things are just embedded permanently that can't ever be altered. News or disclosures or whistleblowing.
That's a really interesting point because my next question is about running a node and the rift between knots and core. But would that initial article be considered spam on the blockchain?
Mm. I haven't gotten into all of that. That's above my
Yeah,
pay grade.
me too. But you do run a node,
I do.
and that's you feel that's important
Yes, and I'm probably going to be transitioning to knots soon.
because you've learned enough about that. You like to see less spam on the network.
Yeah, and yes, and people that I follow that I trust, that are smarter than me, are suggesting it, and so I will probably be doing that soon, transitioning to knots.
Wonderful. And do you believe self custody is important as a Bitcoiner?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Not your keys, not your coin. There's been mountains of history where people have lost, their Bitcoin. And I don't ever want to be a part of that. And so I think now self-custody is it's the ultimate personal responsibility. So you got to really make sure that you know what you're doing if you're going to do that, and spend a lot of time and test it too. Don't just send a bunch of coin to a wallet without testing your seed phrases or um, or moving those seed phrases to a new device. I think some of those things are important. Those tests, like before you send a large amount, send a little small test amount. I mean, and then once that wallet receives that test amount, send it somewhere else so that you can make sure you know how to sign on that device, or those devices if it's multisig. And so there's a lot of responsibility that comes with self custody because there's no customer service, there's no insurance. You can't call someone and say, "Hey, what do I do?" Again, you really got to make sure you know what you're doing. And the Bitcoin community recently had that come up with someone tried to download a mobile wallet for a wallet that doesn't exist mobile. It wasn't on that you couldn't download it on a phone, and then he got scammed out of his Bitcoin. It's real unfortunate, and it's scary. And I'm glad that he went public with it. I really am, because it made me go back and I second guess myself, and then I started looking at my security protocols and what I was doing, what I needed to do. And so hopefully a lot of people can take something away from that, and hopefully he can recover. So
Yeah. Yeah. I was really pleased that Jimmy agreed to go public, and
Mhm.
I interviewed him twice. The
Yep.
first video has almost 40,000 views, and there's a lot of negative comments, but there's more positive, and a lot of people did say it helped them with their own self-custody, and it helped me too. I'm like, I need to pay more attention and learn exactly what this means to hold your own keys. Hey there. Don't forget to like and subscribe to help me grow the channel. Want to sleep easy? MICROSEED lets you stamp your seed phrase onto a small steel washer. Buy the device once and use it forever. I love it. It's discreet, precise, and easy to transport. Get yours below. For powerful self-custody with no backdoors, I recommend the TREZOR wallet. For peace of mind with collaborative custody, the Bitcoin Advisor is a trusted team who can also help with inheritance planning. Just scan the QR code or use the link below. And check out these super cool SATOSHOEs with over 40 styles to choose from. Plus 10% off with my link below. Now, back to the show. Yeah, so do you think that that is one of the deterrents for people getting into Bitcoin, and will that get easier over time?
I think it'll get easier. I do believe that could be a deterrent. These days, retail is just the normies, right? I think it's unit bias. Unit bias is a big thing. Like everybody thinks they're priced out. Like, oh, I missed the bus. It's over $100,000. I missed it. I should have got in it when it was $500 or $1,000 or whatever the number is. And so unit bias is a big thing. The way I try to break through that is a Bitcoin is 100 million units, just like there's 100 pennies to a dollar. Right now, you can get 850 Satoshis for a dollar. And so those, again, just going back 100 million units, we call those units Satoshis. So there's 100 million Satoshis in a Bitcoin. Um, right now, it's about 850 Satoshis for a dollar. At some point, a Satoshi is going to be equal to a penny. When that Satoshi is equal to a penny, a Bitcoin is going to be worth $1 million. And then at some point, a Satoshi is going to be worth 5 cents. And the Bitcoin's worth $5 million. So just trying to break it down into Satoshis. We don't stack Bitcoin, we stack Satoshis. And so I tell people just set a goal. Try to get to 5 million Satoshis or try to get to 10 million Satoshis. And once you get to that goal, set a new goal. Just keep stacking, And so that's how I try to overcome unit bias, because ultimately you're only going to need 0.25 to 0.28 of a Bitcoin in order to have abundance in the future. And so I try to, but people get caught up in these XRPs and all these other silly yo-yo coins, and again, it's because of the unit bias of, oh, well, this is cheap. It's only $2 a coin, or it's only 50 cents a coin, well, I mean, 100 Satoshis is only, 8 cents or whatever it is. That's how I try to explain it, as far as a unit bias is just think in Satoshis, really, just try to stack and accumulate as many Satoshis as you can, and that's going to be very valuable someday. I mean, Bitcoin has more than 10x in the last 5 years. Another 10x is $1 million, or $1.1 million. And the things that we have going on now are a lot different than we've had in previous cycles with all the Wall Street, the institutional money, the government institutions. This thing is just really speeding up. Now we have corporate treasuries, where companies are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets. That's all new and developing. MicroStrategy was the first one to do it. Now I think there's like 160 publicly traded companies that are adding Bitcoin to their balance sheets. And that's one of the things that's developing in my own personal life, is that I'm starting to think in that direction too. Like if I launch a business, I want to have Bitcoin on my balance sheet because of how these things are developing so quickly. Where with the FASB ruling, it allowed Bitcoin to be counted as an asset on your books. And so if I was to launch a business and put Bitcoin on my balance sheet, then it adds value to my company, which is going to help if I want to take out loans or get investors in my business venture. Like this is all kind of pretty revolutionary stuff. So like as a business owner, instead of having properties and real estate, on my as part of my company assets, I can have Bitcoin, and now that Bitcoin can be acknowledged, by the financial system. So these are some really incredible developments that are taking place. Some of these things have evolved and taken off more than just since we spoke the last time 8 months ago. That's kind of where my mind is going now too.
Yeah. And individuals, of course, can put it on their own balance sheets. Companies can now, as you mentioned. And just to end up with, we talked a little bit about the spiritual side before, but how is Bitcoin a spiritual tool for you?
You know, because Bitcoin is a spiritual tool for me, because I consider it pure, incorruptible monetary energy that we've haven't ever experienced. And like I always say, the fiat system is inherently evil because it hides. It's a system that tries to hide and manipulate the theft of your monetary energy over time. And it's a slow bleeding, so you don't feel it all at once. You feel it over time in slow increments, and you're constantly being bombarded and gaslit with the reasons for inflation instead of what it actually is, and that is evil. It's parasitic. It benefits those at the top that are doing it, and those that are closest to the money printer, which is called the Cantillon effect. Those that are closest to the newly distributed money benefit the most, and as that money trickles into the economy, then it affects everybody else over time. And so there's that is evil to me. And so Bitcoin represents this hope and this level playing field that's incorruptible. It's transparent. It's available to everybody. I've said it before. I believe Jesus would have been a Bitcoiner. You know, one of the only times he ever got angry and violent was with the money changers
Hmm.
in the temple. And so um, yeah, when they say, like, there's that saying, money is the root of all evil. Well, I like to say fiat money is the root of all evil. You know,
Yeah. And the love of money, they say, is the
yeah,
root of all evil. But also, sound money will create a much better society. And that's what we believe Bitcoin can become.
yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Tony. Tell us where people can find you.
So I'm on X a lot of time under Kurt Cocaine. That was that was
Great
my
name.
state. That was my stage name from the 1990s. A karaoke stage name. I was the original Kurt Cocaine back then, and then now there's others.
So you can
So
sing, huh?
no, no, no. I could whenever I was drinking.
Well, thank you so much. This was a great chat.
Yeah, thank you, Paula. It's always a pleasure, and I look forward to seeing you on Spaces with Jeff Booth. I'm a
Yeah,
real big fan of
let's
his.
let's go see what he has to say.
Okay.